Hooray. Let me share my screen. Here we are here. Okay, took that there. And that's the project we want. And present. So we've been taking a look at prophetic events in modern times since the days of the Bible. As always, I like to give credit where credit's due. Referencing the works of Messianic Jew, Jonathan Cain, his books there. Always and always and always our first and foremost primary source, and the one that always trumps all else is the Word of God. So where we last left off last week, we had come through time to finally the end of World War I into the Roaring 20s, and we're in the second half of the 20s where we left off, getting into the crash of 1929 and the Great Depression, which actually have very little to do with each other, as we'll see. We'll get into that, but as we'll see the scriptural, spiritual timings of these things. But before we move forward into that, let's go a little bit back into the past, 7,000 years or so, to Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. Going to take us on a little tour looking at, and some of this is just pure bonus from me, so hooray. But I just thought of it, before we look at the depression and things falling down, I thought we might look up and be impressed at, instead of depressed, at some of the things that we will be looking at. First and foremost, Genesis 1, verse 14, creation week, year 5209 BC, thereabouts looks to be. So Genesis 1:14, then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. The Hebrew word there for signs is otot, which also means evidence or mark or omen. The same verse where it says seasons, that Hebrew word is modim, which actually means an appointment or the appointed time or the appointed meeting. So if we take these various meanings of these Hebrew words together, so it's not just that God set the astronomical bodies in place for us to tell time by, that's certainly part of it, but it's not just counting time, it's also recognizing events, that things happen at an appointed time, that there are even omens that are destined and appointed to happen that can be seen by the signs. I'm not trying to get head trippy into astrology or anything like that. We're keeping it scriptural, but God himself declares that that's what these things are for. In fact, Jesus would fuss at folks in his day, in his earthly ministry, saying, you can recognize the signs in the sky, but you're not recognizing the spiritual signs. You can tell the weather, you know, like we have the saying, red sky at night, sailors delight, red sky at morning, sailor take warning, that kind of thing. He says, you guys can tell these things, but you're not seeing the spiritual signs. So the point is that we have an ability. He's not fussing at us for not doing something we don't have an ability to do. He's fussing at them for not doing something they had an ability to do, but weren't doing. So there's an awareness we can gain from these things. Fast forward to Genesis 11. 3,000 years later, 2552 BC, thereabouts. Genesis 11, verse 1. Genesis 11:1, now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. So the people here are of one world together. That theme of one world is going to be very important. The whole conspiracy theory stuff about New World Order, yeah, that's a one world thing that things are going to be aiming towards. Antichrist and all that stuff. Continuing on, skip down to verse 3 and 4. They said to one another, come, let us make bricks. Well, let's go ahead, verse 2, get the whole thing. Start verse 1 down to 4. Context is key, right? Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east. They found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And this will be in the city of Eridu. They said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone. They used tar for mortar. They said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth, which is what God actually told them to do when they got off the ark. But I digress. No, it's not a digression. It's actually an important point. So deliberately defying God, saying, no, we want to do this. So a few observations. They use bricks. Bricks are going to be an important symbol and picture in the Bible, pictorially and actual literally. Remember when much later after this, several centuries later, when the hedge of protection is withdrawn around Israel and Assyria attacks, their first attack before they actually conquered Israel 10 years, 11 years later, what was their cry in defiance in Isaiah 9? The bricks have fallen, but we will replace them with hewn stone. The sycamore has fallen, but we will replace it with cedars. So bricks are a factor here. So these folks want to build a high tower, make a name for themselves. So there's the city, then the tower. So the towers are connected to civilization, society here, symbols out of which the society arises. The tower is like the embodiment or the picture of man's aspiring for greatness. And in fact, the Hebrew word for tower here is migdal, which comes from the Hebrew root word gadol, and some of the different translations for that apply here: to increase, to be lifted up, to be promoted, to wax great, like the moon waxes or wanes, so to wax great, to be magnified, to be enlarged, to become great. So here's all these connotations with what's going on here as this is happening. So Babel, which is what the place will be named afterwards, its original name is Eridu here. So it's a man's attempt at being God. We want to elevate ourselves, and we want to be one. We want to defy God, who told us to do otherwise. So the tower can become an embodiment of pride and arrogance, and likewise, it can become a focal point of judgment, like it was with the Tower of Babel. And so, in fact, should have thought to do this earlier. There's the Tower of Babel over at Eridu, and the big platform behind it on which they were not able to continue their building. The first ziggurat in the world, and first one here, of course, in Mesopotamia, the land of Shinar, where they were with all that. Now let's go a few more centuries ahead to the time of Abraham in Genesis 15. Last scripture we're going to look to together to get our foundation going here. Genesis 15, verse 16. Now in the lifetime of Abraham, around 1867 BC, God tells Abraham in Genesis 15:16 how his descendants, they're going to be taken away, but Abraham is told, then in the fourth generation, they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. We'll be talking about Amorites in Sunday school. So there's the promise of God that there will be a return. That happens, of course, with the days of Joshua and the conquest, coming back to the promised land, and it is 4 generations. But that's one of these promises that has more than one fulfillment. There will be many returns, which means there'll be many departures requiring a later return. And we know the last big one was May 14th, 1948, the establishment of the nation. So we're going to see these things. In fact, what's interesting, y'all remember I made a big deal about the year 1867 and 80, when those folks had their little prayer meeting in London, and Mark Twain and Charles Warren and all that stuff, right? Everything that happened for me, and the Ottoman Empire after 350 years finally letting other folks buy the land and all that stuff because of their big war debt. Well, it just occurred to me looking at this, this promise is around 1867 BC, and this is quoted in 1867 AD at that Hebrew prayer meeting. That's just kind of curious. Quoted by that guy, 50-year-old Karl August Ferdinand Schwartz, and he makes the point in quoting this that they shall return to their own land. Very, very key point. And so God is all about his people and his land, blood, spiritual blood as well as physical blood, and land, spiritual land as well as physical land. This is our spiritual land right here in this physical building. And so we'll see that. So I'm not going to go here, but just as a reference, in the time of Jacob and them going down to Israel, Genesis 32 through 36, they're about 1600s BC. The Bible talks about the return of Jacob, the return of Israel to the ancestral possession, coming back to where their ancestors were. So it's a very key thing for God, that this is where I've got for you. And even if you blow it and I got to take you out, I'm going to have a way to bring you back. God is always faithful, even when his people are not. The promise is there and it can be claimed. There's something to really take hold of and look forward to. Quick side note, as we were singing the song, My God is Real, I like the fact that Israel is kind of like, Israel. It's kind of but I digress. Yeah, there we go. So let's move forward in time just a little bit more. Talking about towers and big things being built. Flashback to Sunday school. A few centuries after, actually about a century, 1 century, I lie, about 1 century after the Tower of Babel, we have in Egypt the Great Pyramid of Giza. So this is in the 2400s BC, and this is 481 feet tall at the time. It's since fallen a little shorter of that, but at the time of its making, 481. So that's, if you figure about 10 feet per story, so that's 48 stories tall. Yeah, that's tall. That is tall. So God wasn't being glorified by this building. In fact, this was a monument to death. It's a tomb. And so we see that sadly, amazing God-given talent and abilities are not always used to glorify God. In fact, that thing was built in the 2400s BC, and it's right there, still standing today. So a testament to man's God-given ability, but again, sadly, God not getting glory. So this remained the tallest structure in the world for about 3,700 years, until something came along known as, skip down here, the Lincoln Cathedral. Now we're going to take a little visual tour. This is an Eric Cooper bonus sidetrack for us. We're going to see lots of pretty pictures. But as we jump through some of these different buildings, see if you notice a trend, something they have in common as we go. So here is the Lincoln Cathedral, which overtakes the Great Pyramid of Giza as the tallest structure on Earth. That spire reached to 520 feet, so about 52 stories. So this is in 1311 AD. Yeah, very pretty building. This is the Lincoln Cathedral. What's that? Gothic architecture, absolutely. I mean, goth wasn't something that kids invented? No, recently, no. Now, this is before the Protestant Reformation. So this is when there's a largely Catholic influence pretty much across the world that was influenced by the Roman Empire. Baptists don't know how to build churches for acoustics. Right? So I'll be reaching out to Brother Drew to see about upgrading our stuff here. But yeah, but absolutely, you're right. Well, they also seem to have money too, but Baptists don't seem to always, I guess we're just not corrupt enough. Did I say that?
Well, Baptist religion is not supported by the state.
Right. by our choice. Very good point. Baptist religion not supported by state because we don't want it to be. Oh, very much so. Oh, yeah. Well, the reason it's called the Roman Catholic Church is because, okay, so Jesus was in the 1st century, died and rose again in the year 33. It wasn't until 300 years later, 313 to be exact, that Roman Emperor Constantine, when he's fighting a battle, apparently sees a vision of a fiery cross on this battle on the Moldavian bridge that says, "By this you shall conquer." So he says, okay, cool. So I'm going to take the power of the Roman Empire and the influence of the church and marry them. And so that we got Roman Catholic Church, an official state religion. Now, Emperor Constantine didn't get baptized until his deathbed because he thought baptism saved him. He wasn't done sinning yet. Had a few family members and enemies to kill still. So yeah, you know. But that's the start of the Roman Catholic Church, 3 centuries after Christ. And so state taxes going to religion and all that stuff, and plus indulgences, you know, selling forgiveness of sin and all sorts of these other things. So yeah. And so some churches that were legitimate joined up with that and became no longer legitimate. Others did not, held their ground. And the word Catholic means universal. Yep. Did you know we're all Catholic? According to the Catholic Church, we're just not being faithful Catholics right now. According to the Catholic Church, just like Green Lanterns, the universe is divided up into 3,600 sectors. The Catholic Church, the world is divided up into dioceses, and we're all part of that diocese. We're just not being faithful to our home base, Catholic Church. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So this is the Lincoln Cathedral, which after 3,700 years replaced the Pyramid of Giza as the tallest structure on the planet Earth. Again, as we go through these, see if you notice a trend. Then we'll get to the back to the 1920s here. So that's the Lincoln Cathedral. So after 237 years, the Lincoln Cathedral spire collapses. Now leaving the tower, not Selim the Grim, we're past him. So that now leaves the Tower of St. Mary's Church as the tallest structure on Earth. Bless you. 495 feet tall, so almost 50 stories. So here is, and we're taking a break looking at pretty pictures. Let's see. I just think that's just cool looking. I don't know, play a pipe organ that has all that on top of it. Yeah. It kind of has that look. I don't know, could be. Just the camera was just pointed to that top section there. So very ornate, to say the least. Very expensive, I can only imagine. And this was built in 1548. So it's a few hundred years old. Yeah. And there we have St. Mary's. Not to be confused with Bells of St. Mary's. That's a movie that's from the 30s. Anyway, so St. Mary's Church holds the record for 99 years until its bell tower collapses. They don't make them like they used to, I guess. So that brings us to, let's see if this section's it. So past the time of Upper New York Bay and Henry Hudson and all that. Let's see, past old John Winthrop. So get some markers here where we're talking about. Right after Harvard, we now have the Strasbourg Cathedral in 1874. So after the Civil War, after 1867 with Mark Twain and all that. Now, We'll see this phrase a lot. Notre Dame, Notre Dame. It means Our Lady. This and other ones aren't to be confused with the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Just like, and again, the Catholic influence. You'll see in Hispanic culture, a lot of places, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of this, Our Lady of that. It's a fairly common name for something. So here's the Cathedral of Our Lady in Strasbourg, France. Yes, she's the lady, St. Mary, absolutely. Very big in the Catholic world. And so, so Strasbourg Cathedral, 466 feet after Mary's collapsed. The bell tower on it. Again, kind of giving us a little breather from all of the info we've been diving through in the 7 years and the 50-year cycles and events. I don't do windows. Has anyone picked up on the trend yet? You'll probably pick up on it when we break the trend. Spire, yeah. A lot of what? A lot of flat surfaces, a lot of spires. Okay. So now, after only, let's see. So I'm sorry. Yes. Good question. So my wife, Sister Ashley, is asking how the different bell towers collapsed. I have no idea, but I can find out. Note to self: how did bell towers, but just as old as the rest of it, collapse? Yeah, now he's in Paris. But you think all these everything else withstood? Why did those collapse? Yeah, good question. So make sure I'm getting my figures straight. Ah, at the top, yeah. Maybe it's a little windier up there and they didn't make them solid enough.
The architecture, the knowledge of architecture, to be able to build something high.
Yes.
Once it's sophisticated enough to hold it that high for long enough, or longer than what it stood.
Yeah, that could be. So I want to make a correction to my math and the numbers I brought out. So 1311 was the Lincoln Cathedral, as far as years go. 1548 was St. Mary's Church. This is 1647. I jumped ahead with 1874. That's the next one. So this is 99 years after St. Mary's Church held the record, then its bell tower collapsed. Now in 1647, the Strasbourg Cathedral. So this is, like I said, it's after Harvard University and John Winthrop and all those things. So while that's going on in America, this is being built.
Now, so the other one collapsed. Now, is this one the tallest?
Yep. St. Mary's Church was at 495 feet. This is shorter at 466 feet.
Okay, but being that collapsed, though, that means this one's.
Yep, exactly. This one replaced it because it collapsed. You're exactly right. Just like St. Mary's replaced Lincoln Cathedral because its thing collapsed. Yep, the spire. Yep. So spire, exactly. Yeah, well, or to making yourself your own God. Yes, 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 yes. So if we win by the other one getting disqualified, hey, it's still a win, right? So now, so that's 99 years after St. Mary's Church. Now we fast forward 227 years to St. Nicholas's Church in Hamburg in 1874. So now we're past the Civil War and all that stuff. Ding, 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 ding. Sister Minnie wins the prize. She noticed that these are all religious buildings. Absolutely. So I mentioned we're going to see a change in that here in a bit. So now, while everything's happening in America, we've come out of the Civil War. Here we are, St. Nicholas's Church. So now we leave France and head over to Germany. In 1874, so St. Nicholas's Church, tallest structure on earth at 482 feet. I know it. We're going to get there, though. We are determined to get there. This is also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Like a 4-minute mile.
Yes.
It's so long, but the app is getting really good.
Yeah, that was quite the barrier, sound barrier kind of thing. Yeah. In fact, while this is happening, this is when some of the skyscrapers are being built in New York, but they're not as big as the cathedrals. In fact, the Equity Life Assurance Building, which has been replaced, it was the tallest building, tallest non-cathedral building on there. So if you factor those out. So yes, here we are, another religious building. This is Hamburg, Germany. So if you're there and you're hungry, now if you're over in Frankfurt, isn't that where they come from? Champagne, France, yeah. Yeah. So I guess in Germany it'd be pronounced Wiener, but like Wiener Schnitzel, yeah. I did not know that. Schnitzel's bread. So yeah, how about that? So yay, St. Nicholas Church, 1874. It holds the record for an entire 2 years.
2 years.
That is it. Until our next trophy goes to the Rouen Cathedral, not Rouen, R-O-U-E-N. 1876. Get rid of that here. And not to make a pun on the spires, but there's a point to all this that we will be getting to. Notre Dame, again, Notre Dame. So here we are back in France, 1876, 495 feet tall. Just look at that detail. Yep, that's not yet, but yeah, all these things are that we're seeing here are still standing. This is 1876. Pretty with the lights. They don't make them like they used to. That's for sure. What's the last thing like this that's been made? Oh! Look how small the people are. So if you ever tour Europe, here are some places that might be worth checking out. Yeah. No doubt. So this place holds the record for an entire 4 years. Until in 1880, it is surpassed by the Cologne Cathedral. Wonder what they invented there. This is after the time that the first Jewish outsiders, after Russia is kicking out the Jews. So outsiders to the homeland are starting to come into the homeland now because thanks to the Ottomans and their war debt, they're able to start buying the land and have their first Jewish settlements there as outsider Jews coming back home. So here's the Cologne Cathedral in Cologne, Germany, 516 feet. We have broken the 500-foot barrier. Germany, yep. 1880. Why do they all look the same? Because George Trevor had a copyright on the, yeah. George Trevor is the architect of the mansions in Resident Evil that no one else will recognize, but yes. Yes, anyway. So yes. So they do look very similar. Keep in mind, universal Catholic, it could be that they have a set look that they want to have in their places. But again, let's keep in mind too, while we recognize there's money, there's corruption and all that stuff, there are devout people who genuinely save people Might not be worshiping in spirit and truth. In fact, pretty much not with the institution here. But save people who love the Lord and are trying to honor and glorify him, even if some of the emphasis might be missing the mark. I think sometimes we shy away from beautifying things because we don't want things to be the attraction and the distraction. And there's balance for that, but obviously we understand that balance and we try to take good care of our building and things like that. So we get the idea there. Almost done with our little tour. Yeah. I don't know. And I don't know if that's just a cross on the chest. Yeah. I don't know if that was something where insert your prayers here or. Yes. Yes. And we're about to talk about gold. Yeah. I just saw an episode of Chopped where they had gold plated donuts that were $100 a piece. Yeah, look at that. Yeah, it was a gold, what's it called, gold leaf.
Right,
Yeah. All righty.
yeah.
So the Cologne Cathedral holds the record for 10 years, bringing us to 1890. Like I said, appreciate you hanging in there. We're almost done. So this brings us past the Zionism movement with Theodore Herzl and Chaim Weizmann and the World Zion Congress that met in Basel, Switzerland. Now we're back in Germany. This thing's called Ulm Minster. Ulm Minster. Ah, I thought it meant cheese. So this is now 530 feet.
He's on a roll tonight.
Look how small the people are. I mean, these things are massive. And again, let's not forget where we started tonight with Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel and the buildings of man. Yep. Right. Right. The good heart of most of the people involved here is to magnify the Lord, lift him up, honor and glorify him. So after 4 years, Ulm Minster is surpassed in 1894 by a place some of you may have heard of. Little place in America known as Philadelphia City Hall. Philadelphia City Hall in 1894, 548 feet. Yeah. But notice the change. Sister Minnie pointed out all these things were religious. This sure ain't.
And she also pointed out that the things around it were flat.
Yeah.
And they, they have small houses or small buildings. But here you've got the cathedral, but then you have other buildings, very tall buildings around it.
Americans don't know how to know. Yeah. So let's talk about this. So in the past 1,000 years of history, cathedrals were the tallest man-made structures on the earth. So for most of that period, is it just a coincidence that the institutionalized Church of Europe was the great center of power on the earth? But there was a shift in the last part of the last 1,000 years. Cathedrals have been replaced by secular buildings as the tallest buildings and structures.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Got it.
No, it's not why I ignored it, because it was true. There's a change in the architecture.
I knew you were
Absolutely.
going somewhere with this.
Absolutely. But no, you're absolutely right. There is the change in the architecture and the styling is there.
That kind of sounds good. I apologize.
No, you're a-okay. No, you're a-okay. No worries at all. No, it's all good. It all relates. Absolutely. That's thinking about it. Yes, we see this change. So we see, just as we go from religious towers and cathedrals to secular and business and government, especially, we see the same thing with power shifting. Religion has less power and government has more power. There's that shift in emphasis and focus on both ends. Keep in mind, this is coming out of the Gilded Age, which was very beneficial. The robber barons were not bad guys. They actually reduced prices on things and made things available to the masses at lower prices. And so, like Henry Ford, yeah, absolutely. And so we see this focus and emphasis and transition happening. And so, after 14 years, still in America now, in 1908, we have, after the Dreyfus affair and all that, with Mark Twain and his buddy Theodore Herzl, the Second Zionist Congress, we have 1908, the Singer Building in New York, which went up to 674 feet. And we're seeing that picture of it because it no longer exists.
And what was the name of this building?
Singer,
Singer.
yes. And it was actually purposefully demolished between 1967 and 1969 to make more room for stuffs. It's actually the tallest building in the world ever to be demolished. Yeah. So that's the Singer Building.
But it's interesting because they call it the tallest building, but really it's just a building and then they count the feet.
Yeah.
So it's really not the whole building. It's
Yeah.
a building with a very tall structure. What is the thing?
Yeah. The spire, yeah.
Whatever it's called, yeah.
In Greece, you'll see a lot of homes with rebar sticking out of the roofs. It's not because they want to aspire to anything like that. It's what's the word with aspire? It's because there's a tax code in Greece where if your home is still under construction, then you get a tax break. So they're not doing anything. They just have rebar sticking out the roof. Yeah.
We're gone.
Yeah, exactly. So now we're going to pick up where we left off for this last little bit here. 1927. So what happens? We're going to talk about, not only do we see these physical towers, but there are other towers. There are other things that are built up in man's world. Economy is one of them. Stock market, Dow Jones, and all that stuff is another. So what happens? Well, basically, we have a thing called the gold standard, which basically means every dollar I print is worth so much gold that I have here. You can redeem this paper dollar for the amount of gold it's worth. And I am supposed to only issue paper money for as much gold as I have. When I've issued money for the last of the gold, I'm supposed to stop printing money. That's the gold standard. It has value to it. Now, we've heard the term free market, which I'm a big free market guy. I actually like the phrase even more, natural market, where we have God-given quality of life and respect for life and freedom. So individuals naturally and freely, voluntarily exchange. I sell something at a price I'm willing to receive for it. You buy something from me at a price you're willing to pay for it. No one else is interfering. It's natural, it's free, it's voluntary. We're both happy walking away from the deal. End of story. That's how it works. So everything has a price. Our labor has a value to it, our wages. So there's that too. You were going to say something?
When I was growing up, my dad had the money, but he was an artisan. He was a bricklayer, stonemason, and he would build things for the doctors to pay the bill.
How about that? See, there's value.
And he would build things for the dentist to pay the bill.
Absolutely. And it was agreeable to both sides.
Yes. It was sort of like barter, except that
Yeah.
it was their work for his work.
Exactly. And so another thing that has a value to it is money itself, as in borrowing money to pay, to buy a car, to buy a house. Well, we take out loans. Keep me straight here, sister. Well, did you know that there's a price for money? It's called an interest rate. Finance charge, yeah. And so in a natural market without a Federal Reserve or anyone tinkering with it, and this will all have spiritual applications here as we go, the interest rate is a natural price of showing how much money is available from people saving and putting in banks for them to lend out to others that people can use for their projects. So when it's left to its own devices, just like staying with the gold standard, it means something that's real and true. And therefore, when there's a lower interest rate, hey, I may take out a loan that I was not going to take out before when the interest rate was too high, meaning there wasn't enough money around, supply and demand, and so therefore I'm going to hold off on my project. Well, if interest rates are low, heck yeah, I'm going to take advantage of that. So that's all fine and dandy when we keep things natural. But there's a problem in 1927. Remember, Great Britain almost went bankrupt in the war. And so they're having an alarming drain on their gold reserves because after the war, they said that the dollar, the British pound, was worth the amount of gold they had before the war started. They were keeping it at that price. But the problem was in between the start and finish of the war, they printed a lot of money, paper money, more than they had gold to cover. So when there's a run on it, people are cashing in and getting their gold. Britain's losing its gold and losing its worth. So what do? They call it the US Federal Reserve. Hey, can you do us a favor? Can you increase inflation in the US to help us offset this? Our Federal Reserve said, sure, we'll be happy to do so. And we did. So the Fed artificially lowered interest rates, causing people to think there was more than there really was, and it created a bubble. And that led to this little thing called the Great Crash of 1929. Black Monday and Black Tuesday. Monday, October 28th of 1929 was in the month of Tishri, which is in the start of the cycle, Tishri being the first month. It's amazing. Economists have not been able to figure out why so many crashes happen in September, October. Well, if you look at the Jewish calendar, it makes sense. So it creates this bubble. And we have on October 28th, Black Monday, the Dow Jones drops 38 points, 12, almost 13% drop, closes at 260. Next day on Tuesday, it drops 30 points, 11% change down to 230. And here's where we get all those images we see of people panicking with the stock market crash, which was inevitable because of the Federal Reserve tinkering with it, which is kind of ironic because the Fed's whole job is to keep that stuff from happening. No, they created it. So let's see if this will load here. I got a quick little video, little 1 minute plus video here.
Through the summer of 1929, there had been ominous rumblings. For months, unemployment had been rising. Automobile sales and department store revenues had fallen off sharply. Then the bottom fell out. On Wednesday, October 23rd, 1929, the first waves of panicky selling began to drive down the price of blue chip stocks, like Westinghouse and General Electric. The following morning, the fear turned to panic, and brokers began unloading margin accounts at record speed. Stock prices plummeted sickeningly across the board, spurring the rush of sell orders from terrified speculators. Still more. As anguished shrieks rose up from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the visitors' gallery was cleared.
So that's that. Okay, yeah. So panic in the streets. People are unhappy. In fact, remember the New York Stock Exchange is right next to Federal Hall. Here are the people massing, and there's our statue of George Washington, which, by the way, that's actually a different building. The original where he gave his inauguration was destroyed, and this was rebuilt in its place in the 1800s. But yeah, so here it's people from the 1929 crash there at that Federal Hall. So remember the Buttonwood Agreement and all that stuff. The Buttonwood's a sycamore tree. So the sycamores have fallen. So that'll all come up as we take a look at some things. So on Monday, that was the second greatest percentage crash the market's ever seen. On Tuesday, it was the third greatest. And so get this. Even after the great stock market crashes of 1929, there was an upturn. Within 6 months of those initial crashes, the market actually returned to its pre-crash levels. But then how do we get a Great Depression? Tune in next time and see what that has to do with the Sabbath year. And it'll fall right in, actually. So as we've seen, got people emphasizing God in their cathedrals, in their monuments, lifting up over 1,000-year period here, as we've seen. Now we're taking a more secular look at things, and now we're elevating man, thinking man knows better than leaving things to their own natural devices. Let's interfere with this, let's manipulate that, and it doesn't work. God knows better than man every time. Leave things alone. The whole French phrase laissez-faire, which means leave it to be. The laissez-faire just simply means that. When we leave people to their God-given talents, abilities without interfering, things work out a lot better. And so we'll see from here what happens in the next Sabbath year that's approaching and how that ties in with a 7-year cycle where people were supposed to be resting in the Lord and focusing on him. And when we take our focus off of him, that's when bad things happen. So moral of the story is keep it simple, don't mess with it, stay close to God and lift him up, and everything else will take care of itself. So I hope you enjoyed a little bit of a different class tonight, looking at some pretty pictures and again, God-given talent, certainly, and great that God's getting some focus and glory, but we lose sight of that and we kind of miss the mark and get some consequences. So any questions, observations? Yes. No, the great crash of 1929 was not in a Sabbath year, but we'll see that the Great Depression is. And so, but they did happen in the Jewish civil calendar starts in the month of Tishri, September, October, goes to the month of Elul. And so it did happen in that Jewish month of Tishri. Tishri, in fact, it was the 24th and 25th. No, those buildings were not built in Sabbath years. And so that will end that right there. And next time, not only we're going to see the Sabbath year and the Great Depression, we're also going to see solar eclipse as kind of foretelling of what was about to happen and the timing of all that. So with that, anything else from anyone before wrapping up for tonight's class? I'm glad you found it, so I'll try to keep it somewhat that way. And so we will pick up next week, continuing into the 1930s, getting us a little bit closer, bit by bit, to our day and time. Go ahead and stop the share here, stop the share, stop the recording. Let's go ahead and stand and meet the center, get ready to close.